I'm moving my channel over to Vidme, or at least I'm in a search to find an alternative to YouTube, at least not to have YouTube as my main channel. I'll put links in the description how you can find my channel on Vidme, and also I've got opened a Twitter account, so if you don't need to open a Vidme account. You can, if you have a Twitter, you'll get notifications, and if Vidme doesn't work out, also be able to follow in that way. And yeah, so if you could help, I haven't got my account verified on Vidme yet, so I'm not able to put. I've got a weekly limit on uploads and that sort of stuff. But yeah, come over there if you can follow me, and will help out to get my channel verified, and so that I can do a backup and have new posts there. Cheers. With Washington being just one example, the modern world with the major public buildings, the major cathedrals, there are a certain set of numbers which are reflected in all of these structures, and these numbers are used in the measures, not just the dimensions, but most importantly the measures. And with these measures, units such as the ancient Doric Ionic, the so-called alleged modern English foot, as well as the Cremona scale, which I would suggest is the ancient Corinthian, possibly in the past, but at least came to be later. But all of this particular system can be shown to go back through time, again through measurement, through known measures, through verified measures, through important temples such as the Parthenon or the temple of Olympian Zeus, but also carrying over, well, basically across the world, across time, across cultures. All coincidence go away. However, here it is, and the Sanchi Stupa in India is just one example. And I want to go through a little bit more and talk about the harmonics, or the beauty, the method of which this ancient system of knowledge has been passed on through. So again, measurable, testable, it's there, it's repeated. And so, for instance, in the last episode, focused on a very certain set of numbers which unified both the Parthenon, Temple of Olympian Zeus, and Sanchi, and how basically the quadrivium, so music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, is embedded within these structures, not just the proportions, but also through the units of measure. Now, these numbers are very important, whether it's measuring time, measuring direction, as with the compass. Also, for instance, the Mayan calendar. This is not a thing that goes from Europe, North Africa, across to Asia. It actually even crosses the ocean. Music, as we use now, the Pythagorean tuning, dimensions of sun, earth, and moon, not just on one scale, but crossing, harmonizing between several ancient sets of units of measure, and how these same numbers which unify all these things are also embedded, for instance, in the yugas, another description of cycles of time. Weights and measures incorporates length, but also direction, as in the compass, but also time, also music, but even in geometry. So whether it's three-dimensional platonic solids, or the two-dimensional vesica, which is the basic building block for all this type of geometry, but also weights. And so we can see it now in the modern era, but going back to Greco-Roman weights, which I'll get into it in the future, have origins in a much older period, which extend again from ancient Egypt, very old kingdom Egypt, even Mohenjo-Daro and Sumer as well. But I think at the core of it, at least, is the importance of sun, earth, and moon. These symbols being constants in all religions, art forms. You even see, children's mobiles. The sun, the earth, and the moon. These are very important things. Our lives are measured by them. Our crop cycles, all of this, everything which is important in our life is embedded within the sun, the earth, and the moon. But also the stars and even the planets will emerge from this particular system. Now, let's just say that it was not known in the past, but at the very least, through these numbers, through the quadrivium, through modern understanding of the world, we have a system of education, at the very least, a way to unify and harmonize geometry, arithmetic, music, astronomy, and all these other fields. Instead of being separate, we can bring them together and yes, and it's a beautiful system. But let's look at Sanchi Stupa in India, and that will be the focus. But all of this again applies to Greek, Roman temples, but also across the world, across time, across cultures. For instance, okay, Sanchi Stupa, here we have some of the dimensions, and to begin with, so the last episode I just focused on the height at 56 feet, but let's look at, so for instance, the dome, 42 feet, which converts there, so you see how the breakdowns of the various units, you know, inches, palms, fingers, grains, yards, fathom, these types of things. So the dome, and then the dome itself sits on, well, the base of it, so 14 feet, and there you might notice, for instance, 168 or 504 are both reflected in both of these measures. But again, now to the previous episode was just to focus on 56, and so just again to eliminate any chance of this being a coincidence, we're going to see how all the breakdowns of these units, whether it's not just the numbers themselves, but even the proportions between them, all link and will deliver us to the same very beautiful system of architecture, which the Great Pyramid will be one classic example which unifies all these points. But also the focus has been on the foot as we know it now, but also the ancient Doric and the Ionic unit, as well as a Cremona scale, which I would suggest again is the ancient Corinthian, because and of course they're reflected still to this day in Freemasonic traditions and very important bits of architecture, major public buildings, cathedrals, etc., not just random stuff. But to begin with, so we have the height 56, 42 and 14 feet. Each one of these will break down into 168. Again, this is the same number you'll find in all the Capitol buildings, White House, etc. 168, so that's 168 hours per week, reference to time, but also going back in regards to, there's more to 168, and again with the pyramid, and we'll come back to that. But for instance, now the dome itself, it's 42 feet, and at 14 feet or 42 hands, we see this very important number 42 again in all the series I've done, New York, Washington, all across Australia. You find this, and it's very important because it connects to Kabbalist. It's in multiple references in the Bible, the Book of the Dead, but more importantly, this being the Hermetic tradition, there were 42 books by Hermes Trismegistus. And so also now we see 504. Now 504 or 5040, again shifted decimal places. There's well, there's another excellent cross-reference. So the factorial of 7 is 5040. But even 42 is reflected, so 42 consecutive primes builds up 5040. There's a lovely reference in the nonagon to that as well, this being one of these excellent keys to decoding it. But also very important in regards to Plato, as in the Platonic solids, but he's famously referenced that 5040 being the best number of citizens to have in a city-state. And again, it's just one of these, you know, very special, very lovely numbers, sometimes called an anti-prime because of the number of divisors that it has. It stands out very importantly from these points. Now, now in the top corner you can see how whether it's a 48-foot Parthenon or a 56-foot Olympian Zeus and the Sanchi Stupa brings us to numbers such as 8, 16, 32, which again are reflected in these smaller units, and each one of those units in feet converts to the Cremona scale rather wonderfully. And so for instance we have 48 reflected in all three of these divisions, and 48 whether it's in the Yugas, Buddhism, both the Ark of Utnapishtim, the original flood legend, for the Troy ounce, reference to in Jupiter and Bode's law, but especially important is a recurring theme is the Ark of Utnapishtim and New Jerusalem, and how these are conversion stones. Very much like the Salamis stone, they're a way of bringing things together. Well, written in plain sight, it's like a conversion tool. Now, I covered this in the earlier episode, but I'll just go through it briefly again. For instance, 144, which is again repeated in all of these breakdown, not just the total height, but even the smaller units. And again, New Jerusalem, Ark of Utnapishtim in the Yugas, as well as the Mayan calendar, for instance, 144,000 days in Abaktun. Sun, Earth, and Moon. Well, so in the long scale, both the Sun and the Moon, or 1440 minutes per day. Ancient weights and measure scales, such as the Greco-Roman screen resolution, even radio transmissions. It's not just ancient; it's passed on. And very important in geometry, whether it's the octahedron, the addition of the Platonic solids comes to this particular number. Fibonacci scales, first, second, third, fifth dimension geometry, whether it's the hexagon or the vesica or the nonagon. Once more, the same things always bring us back together. 192 mentioned earlier, again with the musical tuning, or G, as well as a reference to Uranus. 576, again, it's a bringing it over from the previous episode to this one. We see how it has a double reference. Everything does a double multiple reference. It's like they're telling us that this was not a coincidence. Pay attention, there's something here. Now at 42 feet, that's 1296 grains on the Cremona scale. Sun and Moon, the number of minutes in a 360 degree compass. Apothecaries weights, that Treta Yuga. Plato's number, it's being 6 to the 4th. And again, Sun, Earth, Moon, for instance, the 1296, or 1,296,000, in a reference to the compass. It's time and the clock and the compass, time and direction. Also, the smaller units will bring us to 12, and this very important, 12 apostles, 12 people in the jury, 12 people on a board. It just, a dozen is in 12-inch foot, the vesica, 12 months, in the great year, or the 12 constellations. Again, it's a lovely number across dimensions, 1 to the third times 2 to the second times 3 to the third. Geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, measuring time, also many other applications to it. But the Kali Yuga, for instance, 432, and also breaks down into 12, but the number 432, again, very important. So we have A432. Of course, again, multiple references. We also bring us to the Ark of Utnapishtim, New Jerusalem, measure scales, the Sun, the grand cycle of the Yuga, the Kali Yuga itself, the Vesica, so music, geometry, these ancient legends, astronomy, weights, or measures of length. It's a persistent set, and again, crossing cultures, crossing time. 24, 24 hours a day. Long rods, 24 defines the earth. Even though we have 24 break, in knuckles. Again, one of these numbers, beautiful across connection to the Tetractys as well. So instead of adding the numbers in the Tetractys, if you multiply them, you get 24. The Vesica, 24 letters in the Greek alphabet, not shown here, but also 24 letters in the later Hebrew alphabet, but Alpha and Omega being a nice reference to 24. And also, again, twice we get this reference to 36, and 36, what do we have again? We have the same pattern. So whether it's the Mayan calendar, the moon, 360 degrees, 3600 seconds per hour, or 3600 seconds per degree in the compass. Again, the yugas appear, so 1296. That's 3,600 divine years on that scale. And moreover, it's a very important in geometry. And for instance, the pentagon, reference to the golden number, 36 degrees cosine brings us the golden number. The icosahedron, well, the 360 degree circle, but also any four-sided poly, 360. And again, the vesica, we have another reference there, so crossing, the same themes over again. Even, well, in arithmetic, so the triangular numbers from which, again, referencing back to the Tetractys and the Tetragrammaton, but also 30, because of the beauty of the number 6, even 36, again, cross dimensions, so these numbers have the same very specific, very important powers which separate them connect them to each other but separate them from the infinite sea of numbers around them. Now at 108, so for instance 42 is 108 Cremona hands. Well, the compound at the front of Sanchi Stupa is 108 feet wide. Sanchi Stupa itself has 108. That article I mentioned earlier, linked it in the earlier episode in regards to the astronomy of Buddhist stupa, especially Sanchi, and the full circle of balustrades, 108 posts. Double references inside and out. It's the same pattern. Again, they're reinforcing these things. Now, it's a Buddhist stupa. Now, you can't have one that doesn't have 108. It's so important. Jains, Hindus, Buddhists as well. But 108 symbols on Buddha's foot when he died, each of his feet, 108 questions, 108 statements, 108 beads on the japa mala, which again connects with Hindus and Jains as well. So modern stupas, such as the one in Spain or the one in Colorado, 108 feet. Wat Pho, you have 108 symbols, but also 108 offering bowls, or they'll have 108 steps or 108 windows or some variation on it. It's an essential piece in their temples, their architecture, and their legends as well. But 108 feet in these modern stupas, well, it goes back time. So the Ashan Jade Temple, the Biop Joseph Buddha in Korea, but also in Tibetan, 108 gates, 108 chapels, and it's very interesting that these same measures and these auspicious measures, like for instance the alleged modern 108, carries back. But also, so in ancient China, going through to Shaolin and Chinese literature, 108. It's just a standard, consistent there. It's there all the time. And one thing we'll get back to later is in the first emperor of China, and around about that time, it's hard to lock it down exactly, but one must walk 10,800 li to achieve wisdom. And what is a li? We'll look at that. Very interesting. But for instance, in Hindu and yoga and more of these like Eastern traditions, Vishnu, multiple references to 108. Now there are also 108 chakras in your body which you can adjust. 114 in total, 112 in your body, but 108 which you are said to have access to. 108 sun salutations on the equinox in yoga. But of course, this is not limited to the East, because in the ancient measure scales, whether it's going back to the earlier Greek period through to the Byzantine and carried forward even into 14th century England, 108 grains, 108 is a measure of weight, measure of distance, and of course that carried through. So a yardstick, which is a famous phrase still now, a yard, well, that's 108 barleycorn, but also a measured volume, like one butt of wine or a pipe as it's called, but it's 108 gallons, stacks of timber, 108, so many examples. These are just a sample of them. And still full screen resolution, so 10 HD, 1080. In Australia especially, we've really they've tuned into this in our standards, because in both AM and FM, very important. It doesn't appear everywhere else, but definitely in Australia. But also, again, it's not just this element. For instance, Zion is mentioned 108 times in the Bible. Another name for Jerusalem, but Zion itself, not Jerusalem, Zion 108 times. In the Odyssey, Odysseus returned, he found 108 suitors vying for Penelope. Again, this is another example where it's cross-time, cross-cultures, referenced in stories and legends and measures and architecture consistently. So many examples across the ancient world now. Famous Abu Simbel, big Abu Simbel, the facade there is 108 feet high. Even the height of the statues, and little Abu Simbel, same thing. The obelisks in Aksum in Ethiopia, the tallest of them, which is now fallen, was 108 feet. Lots of examples again around that period, across time, cross cultures, everywhere. Going back, well, ancient like Stonehenge, Tripit stones, hurler stones, that's just 3 examples, but they have this 108 feet diameter, and they're all on between the 50 and 51st parallel as well, which is another interesting point connecting this to time, but that's for something else. But they're not the only ones. So, for instance, Saltno up in Scotland, but also Greyweather's 50 degrees north, and the Kingsmen, which is 51.9 degrees north. That's a little, but anyway, that's right in the chunky period in regards to the 1 meter pendulum and measuring the day. Which, but again, that's something else. Now, for instance, Angkor. Now, the bridge into Angkor, 54 statues on each side, so 108. The churning of the Milky Sea, 54 figures on each side, 108 in total. 108 small towers around Phnom Penh. Chao Say Tavoda, 108 feet wide, so like it's referenced in number, in measure, and legend as well. It's consistent, goes throughout time, cross cultures, cross time. It's all just an accident, of course. But why is 108 so important? Well, if you multiply the diameter of the sun times 108, you get the distance from the sun to the earth. You multiply the diameter of the earth by 108, you get the diameter of the sun. If you multiply the diameter of the moon by 108, you get the distance from the earth to the moon. Even the diameter of the moon in the long scale, 108, the circumference of the earth, 216 nautical miles, but so whether it's day and night divided by 10,800 nautical miles. At the top speed of the earth, 108,000 kilometers per hour, which is the polar diameter of Saturn, and Saturn 10,800 days to orbit the sun. And just like the Earth, because Bode's law connects Saturn and the Earth, but well, if you multiply the diameter of the sun by 1080, you get the distance from Sun to Saturn. So whether it's in proportion or whether it's in measure, this is a consistent through astronomy. And even so, in Hindu tradition, 108 is an astronomical number as well. So this is all just a coincidence where modern weight scales measures, including the computer age, going back through to the horse and cart time, going back. This is in the West, but also in the East. Egypt and all these other places, just consistently this number 108 comes up so much. But there's of course there's always more to this, and we'll have a look at that now. Okay, so earlier I mentioned in regards to China and for instance the first emperor and Shaolin. Now the postures and movements together, 181 plus 108 brings us to 189. The first emperor, and when exactly this emerged, I'm not sure, but 10,800 li. One must walk 10,800 li to achieve wisdom, which connected over to that point. Well, how much is 1 li? Well, it's said to be approximately 576 meters, which converts to 1,890 feet. So if we go back to Sanchi Stupa, 108, to begin with, 10,800,000, well, 108, I got the numbers are merging together, but at 56 feet, that converts to the Doric 1,890 grains. In Egyptian royal miles, the diameter of the moon is 1,890 Egyptian royal miles. So 108 and 81890. Well, here's the kicker, because the number of feet in a li appears to be, I must put a bit of an asterisk there, because it's the best is an approximately 576.072 meters, 1890 feet. One must walk 10800 to achieve wisdom. The diameter of the moon, or 1890 Egyptian royal miles, times 108, the distance from the earth to the moon. In the day or the night side, 10,800 nautical miles. And again, this number, so 10,800 days for Saturn, or 108,000 kilometers, which of course brings us back to this, whether it's 108, 1,080, 10,800 or 108,000, how this all comes back to sun, earth, moon, and this very wonderful system. So just with this one number, just as this one example of these numbers, just with this one, you memorize this, and you've pretty much, like Sun, Earth, and Moon, as well as Saturn, you've pretty much clocked it. So this is what's happening. This is a method now, whether it's in Washington or Canberra or Brasilia or Astana or Paris or London or these ancient cathedrals across Europe or ancient temples across the world, modern Buddhist temples, older Buddhist temples, Hindu legends, Buddhist legends. You also find it in old mosques such as in Samara and, well, again, so many other places, just reoccurring again across time, across cultures. Apparently it's all just a coincidence. Nothing to say this is said to, when it comes to, like, to even mention this in many of those peer-reviewed journals. They just refuse to put it in there. Things like Bode's law and all this other stuff. It's just not to be talked about while this new education system is pushed on us, which is, these separate. Not only do you learn maths as a separate field, you're also taught in this very poor way, and this is the beauty of this system, encoded in ancient architecture, modern architecture, legends all across the world, across time, across cultures. So with that, hope you enjoyed. There will be a few more episodes in regards to Parthenon, Sanchi, Olympian, Zeus, and then connecting them to some other places. Just please remember, I'm going to be trying to move to Vidme as my primary account. The links will be there in the description. Also links to the earlier episodes. Once I can get the account verified and I don't have a weekly upload limit, I'll be using that more and more and see how that works out. But yeah, definitely looking for an alternative to YouTube, at least for a backup account, the way things are going. But anyway, with that, hope you enjoyed this one. Still be more to come before I do stop with YouTube. I will be completing this series and a couple to do in regards to Washington, at least to finish it off. So in case you don't want to go over there, I won't leave you hanging in that regards. Okay, so with that, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.